Hello everyone and welcome to a new lesson, to a new episode on your channel Pure English. In the beginning of this lesson, I would like to call on you to subscribe to the channel, interact with this live stream through liking it, through sharing it to anyone who might be interested in learning English. And don't forget to leave your comments down there in a comment box if you have any suggestions or remarks. Well, the topic of today's live stream or today's live lesson will be the passive voice. And this is a very important grammatical lesson or grammatical point that many English learners find a lot of confusion in it, which is how to change a sentence from an active voice to the passive voice. In English, the normal structure or the normal grammatical pattern for the sentence is to be in the active voice. What does that mean? If your sentence begins with the subject, this means that your sentence is in the active voice. Again, if your sentence begins with the subject, this means that your sentence is in the active voice, and that's the normal pattern or the normal structure of sentences in English, is to begin with the subject. Sometimes we need to change that structure by placing the object at the beginning of the sentence instead of the subject, which means that we begin the sentence with the object rather than with the subject. When we do this, when we begin our sentence with the object instead of the subject, this means that we have changed our sentence from the active voice to the passive voice. So, one of you might ask, why do we need to change a sentence from the active voice to the passive voice? Well, there are many reasons for that. We might be interested in the object more than we are in the subject, which means that the object in the sentence is more important to us than the subject. In that case, it's more appropriate to begin the sentence with the object rather than the subject, which means that we change the sentence into the passive voice. So one reason you might need to make your sentence passive rather than active is your interest in the object rather than in the subject, or more than your interest in the subject. So you begin your sentence with the object rather than the subject. Another case in which the sentence could be in the passive is when the subject is clear, it's obvious from the context of the sentence to the extent that you don't need to mention it. For example, when you say, the criminal was arrested yesterday. The criminal was arrested yesterday. So you begin your sentence here with the object, which is the criminal, because we all know who arrested the criminal. It's the police. We needn't mention it. It's clear, it's obvious from the context that the subject is the police. So you don't need to mention it in the sentence. So you make your sentence passive by beginning it with the object, and you say, the criminal was arrested yesterday, rather than saying, the police arrested the criminal yesterday, which is the active version of the sentence. So, up to this point, we have covered two reasons why you might be interested in a passive sentence rather than an active sentence. Number one, if you're interested in the object more than the subject. And number two, if the subject is clear or obvious from the context to the extent that you don't need to mention it because the readers or the speakers are aware of that subject and they know who or what that subject is. Sometimes also you want to make your style more impersonal. So the passive voice is characterized by being impersonal, which means it's not directed towards the subject. Rather than mentioning who the subject is or what the subject is, you just begin your sentence with the object and make your sentence passive rather than active, because you want to avoid any embarrassment that might be caused by mentioning the subject, whether that subject is a person or a thing. This could be another reason why you might be interested in using passive sentences rather than active ones. These are the most important 3 reasons why you might be interested more in changing your sentences from the active voice to the passive voice. Right, now let's move on to the grammatical section of the lesson, the rules and so on. So let's begin with an active sentence. For example, we say, somebody cleans the office every day. So this is an active sentence. Why? Because it begins with the subject. The subject here is the word somebody, because that person is the person who performs the action, who performs the verb. Somebody cleans the office every day. So somebody is the subject. This is an active sentence. Where is the object in this sentence? The object is the office, because the object is the person or the thing on which the verb was performed. That's the person or the thing receiving the action or taking the verb, whereas the subject is the person or the action doing the verb, executing the action, performing the action on the object. So if we look at the sentence one more time, the sentence says, someone or somebody cleans the office every day. Somebody is the subject, the office is the object. Well, this sentence, as you can see, is in the present simple tense. We say somebody cleans the office every day. If your active sentence is in the present simple, you need to use the present simple form of verb to be in the passive sentence. Let's, from now, we agree on a rule of thumb. The rule of thumb today for the passive voice is that any passive sentence must contain verb to be. That's a rule of thumb. You cannot have a passive sentence without verb to be. That's the first rule of thumb I'd like you to bear in your mind. The second rule of thumb for the passive voice is that it keeps or maintains the same tense of the original active sentence. So, if the original active sentence was in the present simple, the passive sentence remains in the present simple. If the original active sentence was in the past perfect, the resulting passive sentence remains in the past perfect, and so on. So we don't change the tense of the sentence when we change it from the active voice to the passive voice. And you use in the passive voice verb to be conjugated in the same tense of the active sentence. What does that mean? Right. If your active sentence is in the present simple, so in the passive sentence, you must use the present simple of verb to be. If the active sentence is in the past simple, in the passive sentence, you must use the past simple of verb to be. So in the passive sentence, you must use verb to be in the same tense of the active sentence. For example, in our sentence here, which says, somebody cleans the office every day, this is a sentence in the present simple. So in the passive version of that sentence, you must use the present simple of verb to be, which is either am or is or are. If the active sentence is in the past simple, then in the passive sentence, we use the past simple of verb to be, which is was or were. If the original active sentence is in the present continuous, in the passive sentence, you use verb to be conjugated in the present continuous. That's am or is or are being. If your original active sentence is in the past continuous, In the passive sentence of it, you used verb to be in the past continuous tense. That's was or were being. If your original active sentence is in the present perfect, then in the passive sentence, you use verb to be conjugated in the present perfect, which means has or have been. If your original active sentence is in the past perfect, you must use verb to be conjugated in the past perfect in the passive sentence, which means had been. And if your sentence, the original one, the active sentence, contains a modal verb like will or would, can or could, may or might, and so on, then in the passive sentence, you keep the modal verb as it is and you follow it with verb to be in the infinitive. So if you have will in the original sentence, you have will be. You have can, in the passive it becomes can be. You have might in the active sentence, in the passive it becomes might be. So this is the second rule of thumb when it comes to the passive voice. And the third rule of thumb in the passive voice is that you must use the past participle of the verb in the active sentence. So of course the active sentence has a verb. This verb, when you change the active sentence into the passive sentence, you must use the past participle of it. So this means that we have 3 rules of thumb. If you bear them in your mind, if you learn them by rote, you will be capable of using any sentence in the passive. Number 1 is that you must use verb to be in the passive sentence, conjugated in the same tense of the active sentence. Number 2, the passive sentence must be in the same tense of the original active sentence. You don't change the tense whatsoever. Rule number 3 is that in the passive sentence, you must use the past participle of the verb in the active sentence. If that verb is regular, its past participle will be the ed form of that verb. So the past participle of travel is traveled. The past participle of enjoy is enjoyed. The past participle of work is worked, and so on. If the original verb in the active sentence was irregular, then in the passive sentence, you use the past participle of it, which is the third form or form number 3, and you can get that from the well-known table in English, which is called the table of irregular verbs or the list of irregular verbs. Which means, if we look at the same sentence we were talking about, somebody cleans the office every day, it becomes in the passive as follows. We look for the object. The object is the office. You begin the passive sentence with it. So the first part of the passive sentence will be the object, and that's the office. The original active sentence was in the present simple, cleans. Then, in the passive sentence, I must use verb to be in the present simple. That's am or is or are. The office means it, so it takes is. So the office is. Then we move on to the past participle of the verb. The verb in the active sentence is cleans. What is the past participle of clean? That's cleaned, because that's a regular verb. So we use cleaned in the passive sentence. Then we put the remainder of the sentence as it is, which is every day. So the passive sentence of that becomes the office is cleaned every day. That's the passive version of the original active sentence, which is somebody cleans the office every day. Now I want to test you. I will give you another sentence now in the active, and I want you to change it to the passive. Let's make the same sentence in the past. If we say, somebody cleaned the office yesterday, how is the passive made here? How can we change this sentence into the passive form? Somebody cleaned the office yesterday. You must look for the object, and the object is the office. We begin our sentence with it. So, the office. The verb is in the past simple, cleaned. So, in the passive sentence, we must use verb to be in the past simple. That's was or were. The office is equivalent to the pronoun it, which takes was. So, we say the office was. Perfect. The main verb in the main sentence is clean. What is the past participle of that? As we said a couple of minutes ago, it's cleaned. So the office was cleaned yesterday. That's the passive version of the original active sentence, which was somebody cleaned the office yesterday. So, to wrap up again on the 3 rules of thumb of making the passive voice. Number 1, maintain or keep the tense of the original active sentence. Don't change it. The tense of the original active sentence remains the same in the resulting passive sentence from it. Number 2, use in the passive sentence, use verb to be conjugated in the same tense of the original active sentence. If the original active sentence is in the present simple, in the passive sentence, use the present simple of verb to be, and so on. Right. Rule number 3 is to follow verb to be in the passive sentence after conjugating it in the same tense of the original active sentence, is to follow it with the past participle of the verb, and the past participle of the verb depends on the type of the verb. If the verb is regular, use the ed form of it. Use the form of the verb ending in the suffix ed. That's if your verb is regular. If your verb is irregular, use form number 3 of that verb from the table or the list of irregular verbs. Now I'll give you some examples of passive sentences, and I'll tell you the tense of each sentence. Butter is made from milk. Butter is made from milk. This is a passive sentence in the present simple. Oranges are imported into Britain. Oranges are imported into Britain. That's another passive sentence in the present simple tense. Let me give you a couple of sentences, a couple of passive sentences in the past simple. This house was built 100 years ago. This house was built 100 years ago. That's a passive sentence in the past simple. You can also say these houses were built last year. These houses were built yesterday. As you can see in all these sentences, the common factor is that they all contain verb to be, and verb to be is followed by the past participle of the main verb in the active sentence. Right, so some of you might ask, what happens to the subject of the original sentence or the subject of the active sentence? Well, when you change your sentence into the passive voice, this subject is not called the subject anymore. We call it the agent. The agent. And if you want to include it in your passive sentence, you need to precede it by the preposition by. So if you want to include the subject of the active sentence in your passive sentence, what you need to do is to put the word by before it, and you place them at the end of the passive sentence. Let me give you a couple of examples. The telephone was invented by Alexander Bell. The telephone was invented by Alexander Bell. The original sentence was Alexander Bell invented the telephone. So in this form of the sentence, which is the active form, we begin the sentence with the subject, and that's Alexander Bell. But if you change the sentence into the passive, beginning it with the object, that's the telephone, it becomes the telephone was invented by Alexander Bell. As you can see, we use the word by and we follow it with the old subject or the new agent, which is Alexander Bell. Another example. I was bitten by a dog. I was bitten by a dog. The original sentence was a dog bit me. A dog bit me. That's the original active sentence beginning with the subject, which is the dog. But in the passive, we begin with the object, which is I. It becomes I because it was the object in the original active sentence. Now it's changed into the new subject at the beginning of the passive sentence. So we cannot begin the sentence with me, because me is an object. What is the equivalent subject of me? That's I. So we say I was bitten, and bitten is the past participle of bite, by a dog. As you can see, by, and then the agent or the old subject, a dog. Also, the walls were painted by a friend of mine. The walls were painted by a friend of mine. That's a passive sentence, and the original active sentence was a friend of mine painted the walls. But then we changed it into the passive. We begin with the object, which is the walls were painted, verb to be in the past simple, were, then the past participle of the verb, which is painted, and then by plus the agent, which is the old subject, it becomes by a friend of mine. Right, I'll give you more examples now on the passive sentences in other tenses rather than the present simple and the past simple. I want to remind you that in the passive, we don't change the tense of the sentence. So we keep or maintain the tense of the original active sentence as it is in the passive version of the sentence. So when I say, my car is being repaired at the garage. My car is being repaired at the garage. So we can return this sentence into the active by saying, they are repairing my car at the garage. That's the active form of it. But we are more interested in the object here, which is the car. We're not interested in the mechanics or the technicians working on the car as much as we're interested in the car itself. So that's the object, and we begin our sentence in the passive with it. So we say the car or my car is being repaired at the garage. Another example, we say the office is being cleaned at the moment. So these two sentences are in the present continuous passive. The original active sentence is they are cleaning the office at the moment. They are cleaning the office at the moment. But because I'm interested more into the office, which is the object, so we begin the passive sentence with it and we say the office is being cleaned at the moment. Right, so these two examples were examples of the passive voice, but in the present continuous rather than in the past or the present simple. Let's have a couple of examples also of the passive sentences in the present perfect. We can say, my key has been stolen. My key has been stolen. So the original active sentence was, someone has stolen my key. Someone has stolen my key. I don't know who has stolen my key, so I put the sentence in the passive because I'm more interested in the known factor, which is the object, and that's the key. So we say, my key has been stolen. My key has been stolen. All right, another example, we can say, I have been invited to the party. So the original sentence was, they have invited me to the party. But rather than focusing on they and beginning the sentence with them in the active version of the sentence, we change the sentence into the passive and we say, I have been invited to the party. So I begin the sentence with the old object, which is me, but because we're beginning the sentence with it, it becomes a new subject. So rather than saying me, we say I, and then have been, which is verb to be, conjugated in the present perfect, the same tense of the original active sentence. I have been, and then we use the past participle of the original verb, which is invite, and we say, I have been invited to the party, and this becomes the passive version of the original active sentence, which was, they have invited me to the party. So the main points, if we want to recapitulate on the same points of today's live lesson, is when we change the sentence from the active voice to the passive voice, there are a few rules of thumb that we have to keep in mind. Number one, we keep or maintain the tense of the original sentence as it is. Whatever the tense of the active sentence is, we keep it as it is when we change the sentence into the passive voice. This is the first rule of thumb. It's not like reported speech. In reporting, we usually change any present tense to its past version. We don't do that in the passive. In the passive, we maintain or keep the tense of the active sentence unchanged or unaltered. So that's the first rule of thumb. The second rule of thumb, when you change a sentence from the active voice to the passive voice, is that in the passive voice, you must use verb to be. That's inevitable. You cannot have a passive sentence without verb to be. And you conjugate verb to be in the same tense of the original active sentence. This is the second rule of thumb when you are changing a sentence from the active voice to the passive voice. And the third rule of thumb, and the last rule of thumb, is to use the past participle of the main verb which was used in the active sentence. If that verb is regular, so you add ed to it, or you use the ed version of it, the version which ends in the suffix ed, as the past participle in the passive sentence. But if your verb in the active sentence is irregular, then in the passive sentence what you need to do is to use form number 3 from that irregular verb, and you can get that from the renowned, from the famous table of irregular verbs or list of irregular verbs that you can find anywhere on the web or at the back of a dictionary, or you can even consult AI in that. So there are many irregular verbs with many past participles, like done as the past participle of do, built as the past participle of build, taken as the past participle of take, and so on. So these are the 3 rules of thumb that you must bear in mind whenever you decide to change your sentence from the active voice to the passive voice. It's also worth noting that the passive is more common in written English than it is in spoken English. What you actually do when you change your style from the active sentence to the passive sentence is that you formalize the style or the register a little. And that's why we find that the passive is more common in written English rather than in spoken, because in speaking we tend to use neutral style or neutral register, or even informal register or slang, if we are talking with people whom we know well and with whom we have close relationships. Whereas the passive, because it changes the register or the style into a more formal one and more impersonal one, as I said earlier, so it's preferable to keep the passive voice as one of your tools in order to improve the style of your writing and to make your writing more formal or more impersonal. So this was our live lesson today, and it was tackling the topic of the passive voice. I hope that everything was clear for you, and if you ever wish to make any suggestion or any remark, please feel free to drop it down in the comment box. I enjoy and I feel very pleased to respond to your comments. And if you find my content appealing, please subscribe to the channel and interact with these videos through liking them, through sharing them with your friends and family members, or with anyone who might be interested in learning English. And it's always a pleasure to meet up with you in our live lessons or in our recorded videos. So stay tuned for our upcoming lessons on your channel Pure English, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye for now, my friends.